how he heals us.
Well, hey, good morning. How are you this morning? So awesome to be here. My name is Andrew. I'm the youth pastor here at COT FC. And the last time that I got to come up and talk from the stage was on Memorial Day weekend. And I pointed out kind of a semi-joke that, like, that's maybe the most common Sunday of the year for the youth pastor to get to fill in on the stage. And I jokingly said, like, I'll see you guys again on Labor Day. And hey, what do you know? Here I am. But no, I'm super happy to be here. Hopefully I can start, like, if I do a good enough job, I can get, like, scheduled for more prestigious holidays. Like, I think Christmas and Easter are probably off limits, but I don't know. I kind of want to push and see how far I can get. But no, in all seriousness, when Pastor Craig was putting this series together, I actually asked if I could have this week, partially because I don't know how to let a joke die, but also because today we're going to be in one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture. If you're just joining us for the first time or you haven't been here in a while, we're in week number 3 of our series entitled How He Heals Us. We're looking at the story in John of Lazarus. And just as a quick catch up for what we've looked at so far in this story, there's this guy named Lazarus, which even if you're not a Christian, you've heard that name, right? But what we do learn is that him and his sisters, Martha and Mary, apparently had a pretty close relationship with Jesus. They would have considered Jesus more than just a teacher. They would have considered him to be a personal friend. And then one day, Lazarus gets sick, and word is sent to Jesus that, hey, Jesus, your friend Lazarus, like, he's going to die, but we know that you have the power to heal him. Will you come and do that and save his life? And in the first week of this series, we looked at this crazy reality that Scripture tells us that because Jesus loved Lazarus, he did nothing, which is something that is so hard for us to wrap our minds around if we don't have the proper perspective or context. But then last week, we get to the point in the story where Jesus does eventually visit the family. This is several days after Lazarus has passed. And Lazarus' sister Martha comes to meet Jesus, and Pastor Craig just did an amazing job of unpacking this interaction between Jesus and Martha last week. If you're watching online right now, I would almost recommend, like, go watch that now. You can watch this one, like, on demand later. Just promise me you're going to watch both of them. That way, you know, I have a shot to come back here on the next holiday weekend. But if you missed last week, like, go back and watch it online. It was amazing. We get this amazing teaching moment where Jesus is able to instruct Martha and show us that, like, no matter what tragedy our lives throw our way, we never lose our hope in Jesus. That God is never smaller than the tragedy that we're facing. That even if we don't understand what we're going through, we can still keep our faith in God. We can still keep our hope in Jesus. But this week we come to maybe my favorite part of the entire story. We get to look at my favorite character in the entire story, and it's the character Mary. Now, if you remember last week in the story, Jesus comes to town, and Martha goes out to meet him, but Mary stays home. We don't know exactly why, but I don't think it's very hard to imagine why. But what we do know is that we come to this part of the story, and Mary seemingly has a slight change of heart. And John chapter 11 is where we're at today. We're going to start in verse 28. So when she said this, she being Martha, she went and called her sister Mary, saying, "The teacher is here and he is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. You ever experienced this where there's somebody, usually it happens to me when I'm, like, upset with somebody, where, like, you have this quick change of heart. Like, at first you're like, I am not talking to this person. And then, like, 2 minutes later, you're like, actually, no, this person needs to hear, like, everything that I want to say. Like, you have that real quick change of heart. Again, like, it usually happens to me when I'm like, I feel misunderstood or I want to confront somebody, right? But I think we all kind of can relate to that. We see this quick change of heart in Mary, that when Jesus had first come to town, Mary chooses to stay home, but now something has happened, and she is eagerly anticipating her opportunity to speak with Jesus. And I have to imagine that part of her posture is, I'm going to go and confront Jesus. I'm not super happy with this guy. He's my friend. He's a friend who I happen to believe is the Son of God. Pretty crazy. But he like didn't come and heal my brother Lazarus, like his friend. Like, what's going on? I have so many questions. But Mary is going to get up and she's going to quickly go and confront Jesus. In verse 30, we pick up, it says, "Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there." A quick reset of the story. In this culture that this story is taking place, mourning and grieving of loss was taken really seriously. They did it really well. Like, they held the grief process to be of like really high importance, to the fact that this is days after Lazarus has died. And Mary and Martha aren't just receiving like nice text messages from their friends, but like their friends and their family and all of their community and even professional mourners are there to support them in their grief, to help them to mourn. And so now, keep in mind that there's an audience for this next conversation that is going to happen. This scene is going to unfold in front of all of the people who are here to support Mary and Martha in their grief. And when Mary finally gets to Jesus, something really, really interesting happens in verse 32. It says, "Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.'" Now, this is such an interesting verse to me because there seem to be two different things happening that seem to contradict each other. Mary is physically and logically expressing her faith in Jesus. She falls at the feet of Jesus, and even in her questioning says, "I know that you're the Son of God, and if you were here, you had the power to heal my brother." Her faith doesn't wane. However, it is wrapped up in this context of her almost confronting and questioning the inaction of Jesus. And this can trip me up a little bit. I think it could trip a lot of us up, and I think the reason why is because as Christians, we tend to be susceptible to this false dichotomy between faith and questions. That whether it was explicitly or implicitly taught to us, either as children or as adults, we develop this belief that a true faith in Jesus cannot exist alongside questions. That if I have a question, if I feel the need for an answer to something that doesn't make any sense to me, that means that I don't have enough faith. How many times, for those of you who grew up in church, did you hear adults, when you had these questions and you didn't know any better, say, "Oh, I don't know the answer, but you just have to have faith"? As if faith is like just like choosing to be ignorant. That's not what it is at all. Right? Faith can absolutely coexist with our questions. But because we fall into this belief that the two compete against each other, we go a step further. And when tragedy inevitably hits us in our life, because we have this belief that we can't have true faith and entertain our questions, we also believe that we can't really entertain our pain and keep our faith. Because after all, God is bigger than your pain. And if you're going to sit and you're going to dwell in this bad thing that happened, that doesn't really sound like you trust God to redeem your situation. And we know, we can quote a million different verses at you to tell you, God works everything together for your good. And then maybe you hear, one of the more like infuriating things to hear, but well-intentioned thing from another Christian when you're experiencing a time of tragedy, which is God has a plan. As if your tragedy was like a necessary part of God's plan. We forget that God works in spite of our tragedy, not because of it. But because of this, when things happen, we feel like, okay, I can either have an authentic faith in Jesus, or I can entertain and dwell on the pain of the tragedy. A few months ago, my family, we kind of entered a season where we've had a little bit of a rocky couple of months, experienced a little bit of loss. I found out 2 days before Father's Day that we were unexpectedly expecting our fourth child. If you guys don't know, we have 3 kids. We thought we were done. We wanted to be done, and then, then we weren't suddenly. And it was like, oh, well, this is terrifying. And we had about a month between the time that we found out that we were pregnant, and we were actually able to go see a doctor. And in that month, we experienced just a wide range of emotion. It was the first time, and I love being a dad more than anything else, but it's the first time that my overwhelming emotion towards my wife being pregnant was one of fear. I was stressed. I didn't know how we were going to be able to do this. I didn't think we were in a place where like it was a good idea for us to continue to have kids. But over the course of a month, we prayed and we supported one another, and we wrapped our heads around the fact that, man, we are having another kid. And we're actually okay with that. And those of you who have kids, you know it doesn't take very long for you to fall in love with your kid. You love your kid way before the day they're born. And then about a month later, we went in for our first doctor's appointment. We went in for an ultrasound. And we found out that the baby didn't have a heartbeat, that we had miscarried, that my wife carried it just short of 10 weeks and had to have a DNC procedure the next day. It was rough. And I don't have to tell you, I know that there's so many women in this room who've experienced this is now the second time that we've experienced the loss of a child before they're even born. It's really, really common. Sometimes the statistic is misquoted that people say 1 in 4 women will have a miscarriage. It's 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a miscarriage. And so I know that there's a lot of you who've experienced that same grief. And for us, man, we're still processing through that. And I'm a professional Christian, and I'm still processing through that grief. Right? And then a couple of weeks later, I lost my grandma. And she lived an amazing life. She's one of the most incredible people that I ever knew, one of the people that I adored more than anybody else. And so we experienced 2 very different but very intense forms of loss in a short time. And what's amazing is that there were so many people who kind of rallied around us and like made sure that we knew that we were loved. That they made sure that we knew that there were people who were going to go through this with us. But you also get people who are really well-intentioned who have to throw the Jesus juke in. You guys know a Jesus juke? It's like, hey, we could talk about this, but instead, I'm going to throw this bomb. And it's essentially what you get told is like, yeah, man, that's sad, but they're in heaven now. In other words, like, stop being sad. They're in heaven. It's like, dude, like, I believe that, but am I allowed to be sad that my grandma died? Am I allowed to be sad that we lost a child at 10 weeks of pregnancy? Like, am I allowed to feel that? And we get uncomfortable with that. We get uncomfortable because we can't see how our authentic faith in Jesus can actually coexist with the reality of our pain. And so typically what we do is one of 2 things. We either suppress the pain, pretend like it isn't there, pretend like it doesn't bother us because our faith has overcome our pain, and then it just sits there and it festers and we don't learn how to deal with it and we don't heal from the pain. Or we go the other way, we say, man, I don't believe that God can be good and this pain can be real, but man, this pain feels really, really real. So we decide that God isn't as real as we thought he was. But what if I told you today that faith in questions, that faith in suffering, that faith in tragedy don't actually work against each other, but they actually work together? I'm pretty open about my story. I've never shared it from stage up here, but it's something that I'm pretty open about. It's something that I wish that more people talked about in general. I think we as a society are getting better about talking about this specific issue. And as a church, I think we were kind of the last to wrap our minds around the issue of mental health. And I'm pretty open about my story. I've struggled with clinical depression and anxiety my entire life. I'm currently medicated for both. I'm currently seeing a therapist. And it's been maybe the best decision that I've ever made. The problem was I didn't discover that I was depressed until I was in my mid-20s. I just thought life sucked. Like, I just thought I was a sensitive kid. I thought I was the problem. I had no idea the why behind the what of what I was feeling. Now I can think back and I can identify different patterns in my life and say, oh, that was depression. That was a chemical imbalance in my brain that was causing me to distort reality, that was causing me to have clouded judgment, clouded thoughts. The best way that I've heard depression described to people who haven't experienced it is that depression makes getting out of bed in the morning feel like climbing Mount Everest. And I know a lot of you guys know exactly how that feels. Several years ago, I read a statistic that 1 in 4 Americans are medicated for some sort of mental illness. Let's take a second and think about what that means. Because if 1 in 4 Americans are going to a doctor saying, I have mental illness and I need medicine for it, how many more people are struggling and not being medicated for it? Either because they don't know what they're experiencing, they don't know that they're actually struggling for chemical, like brain chemistry reasons, and either they don't know to talk to a doctor, or they don't believe in medicine, or they're looking at alternative treatment options that don't involve medicine. The reality is, like, a lot of us in the world struggle with some sort of mental illness. For me, it was depression and anxiety. And that, by the way, that statistic was before 2020. And I know that a lot of you guys experienced some sort of mental illness for the first time in the pandemic. And if that's you, I just want to say welcome to the party. There's room for all of us, but there's also hope for all of us. And I want you to know, if you've never heard a pastor say this on stage, there's nothing wrong with you if you experience some sort of mental illness, that it isn't a lack of faith in your life. Just like any physical ailment isn't God's judgment on you because you don't have enough faith. Now, that doesn't mean that God doesn't want to heal you. But I one time had a pastor tell me, at a point in my life, I'm 24, 25, and I'm coming to grips with the fact that, this thing that I've been experiencing my whole life is depression. And for me, that was actually good news. I can actually identify it. I can call it out. I can say, hey, this isn't really what reality is. This is just what my brain is interpreting, and I know why. I have steps that I can take to heal from it. But I began to also feel that God had placed this calling on my life to work in ministry. I think we all have a calling on our life. For me specifically, I was feeling that God was calling me into a career of working in ministry. And so I began to get vulnerable with this pastor that I was opening up to him, and I started to just be honest with him about the process that I was going through. The fact that I was discovering that I struggle with depression, that I struggle with anxiety. And in response, he suggested that the fact that I was struggling with depression was evidence that I lacked the spiritual maturity to work in ministry. And I don't want to pile on this guy, because I think a lot of people, I think he's coming from a good place. I think he's coming from a place where he believes that God is bigger than depression. Now, I don't think he understands how depression works, which is fine. Like most people know, we're just learning how to talk about it. I don't even fully understand how it works. But not only was that harmful to my self-identity, but it's actually just not even biblical. The prophet Elijah in the Old Testament was used by God to do incredible things, and we have every reason to believe that he was also struggling with depression his entire life. In fact, just about every single person that God chooses to use in the Old Testament and the New is maybe the least likely person to become a spiritual leader. And yet we fall into this line of thinking that because God is bigger than our pain, we should find a way to get over it. Whether that is a diagnosed mental illness, whether that is just grief, loss, some sort of tragedy, we have this idea that because God is bigger than that, I should be able to get over it without having to feel it. But acknowledging your pain and asking questions, grieving deeply, it doesn't mean that you lack faith. In fact, these are the times in our lives where we can grow the most in our faith and grow closer to Jesus. Let's look at verse 33. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. I'm going to read that one more time. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was, say it with me, deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Has the thought ever occurred to you that the pain that you either have experienced in your life or you're currently experiencing in your life isn't just known by God, but it actually moves his heart? Have you ever considered that the God of the universe who sent Jesus down to die for you responds to the pain that you feel by being deeply moved and greatly troubled? I'll be honest, I have a hard time seeing that side of God. And that's not because that's not who he is, that's because of lies that I've believed. It's incredible. Not only is God aware of your pain, he's deeply moved by it. Specifically, he's deeply moved when we open that part of ourselves up to him. See, Mary was vulnerable with her feelings towards Jesus. She didn't censor herself to be less offensive to Jesus. See, we learned something so amazing about Jesus in this moment. Maybe, in my opinion, it might be the most incredible thing that we learn about Jesus. It's not just the fact that he's God, which is true, and it's amazing. It's incredible. It's crazy. It's not just the fact that he's all-powerful. He has the power to heal. Also incredible. It's not even the fact that he put on human flesh so that he could save us from our own sin, even though that, don't get me wrong, mind-blowingly incredible. But it's the fact that Jesus, being God, being all-powerful, and being on his mission to save all of humanity, still stops to feel what we feel. Because we learn that Jesus desires something from us. He desires intimacy. My wife Bailey and I were coming up on our 8th wedding anniversary a month from today, and one thing that I can tell you, if you've been married for a long time, or even if you just have a close friend or relative, you realize that the longer that you're in a relationship with someone, the more your understanding of what it means to love somebody doesn't change, but it deepens, it matures, there's more depth to it. When you're dating somebody and you decide to say, I love you for the first time, that's based off of infatuation with somebody, right? I like this person a lot. I like these things about this person. I'm attracted to this person for this reason. I like how I feel when I'm around them. And then you decide to enter into a relationship with them, and the longer that you're in relationship, love becomes something else. All of a sudden, without even trying, you're motivated to do things for this person that you love. You're motivated to serve them. You're motivated to be thoughtful of them, to do acts of service for them, to put their welfare above your own. But there's an even deeper level that you can only experience when you're in relationship with somebody for a long time, and it's that intimacy piece. It's that you move beyond just simple infatuation, or even move beyond just wanting to serve somebody, but you just have this deep longing to know the entirety of this person. That I want to know everything about them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The more ugly I see in this person, the more I fall in love with them. Because I love them so much that I want to know that. I want to see that. I want to see the nakedness of their soul. And that's what Jesus desires from us. I think the best example, the most loved I've ever felt by my wife was a few years ago. I talked about my struggles with depression. What I didn't mention is that there's been 3 distinct seasons in my life where that kind of caused me to entertain suicidal thoughts. The first time I was 16, I didn't know, you're 16, you don't know anything anyway, right? So the world was just it was never going to change. It was just, I felt utterly hopeless, right? The second time I was 19, I was in the process of flunking out of college, which was a big deal because my entire life I had these huge academic expectations thrust on me. So my life, or in my mind, my life was basically over. All of the meaning of my life was I was just I was burning it away. It was gone. I was in the process of that. I experienced suicidal thoughts. But the third time was maybe the most scary for me. It was when I was 26 years old. I was married. I had 1 kid, and we had our second kid on the way. And I remember just feeling a lot of things. One was, oh my gosh, I thought that God had given me victory over this. Because I know that God intervened in my life when I was 16. I know that he intervened in my life when I was 19. I know that he delivered me supernaturally from that place of depression. But I didn't know it would come back. Not only that, but then you have the actual pain that you're feeling when you're in that pit. And on top of that, I felt just an insane amount of guilt and shame. How could I consider myself to be a good husband and a good father if I'm still struggling with this? Who wants to be married to somebody who's struggling with suicidal thoughts? Who dreams of having a dad who's mentally ill? And maybe the most vulnerable I've ever been with my wife was to let her in on that. Not tell her, hey, this is who I was before we got married, but this is what's happening in my heart and in my brain, like right now, as you're pregnant with our second child. And Bailey responded in maybe the most loving possible way. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't try to cheer me up. She just sat there with me and listened and allowed that part of me to be known and to be safe. See, in order for intimacy to exist, there has to be safety. You can't experience safety, emotional safety with someone if there's part of you that you're afraid to show. Our son Elijah, he turns 6 years old tomorrow. His birthday's on Labor Day, which is funny. The last time his birthday was on Labor Day was actually the day he was born, which means that, and my wife loves hearing this, that the first time she was in labor was on Labor Day. Haha, funny stuff. But he started kindergarten a couple of weeks ago, and my son, we're experiencing this crazy phenomenon right now where he goes to school, he goes to church. Right now he's in the blue room, and I promise you, he's like the best behaved kid in there. Like, he's so good. He is a model citizen. I always hear from his teachers, his Sunday school teachers, his preschool teachers, I would always hear, like, you have the most polite and well-behaved son. Like, this is like one of the best kids we've ever had. And then he comes home. And I'm like, we're talking about the same kid? I love my son, but man, we are struggling with his attitude, his emotions right now. He is always arguing. He's always whining. He's always complaining. He has to have his way at all times or else he has a meltdown. Like, it feels like constant. And I remember having a conversation with one of his teachers, and she was, bragging on him and telling me, man, your son is just so amazing. We love having him here. And I said, man, that's such a relief. And I told her, I was like, we're really struggling with some of this stuff at home. I'm so glad that he's a completely different kid when he's at school. And she said something that was so incredible to me. She said, that means you're doing something right. And I said, I don't know. I think it means you guys are doing something right. And she's like, no, you guys are doing something right because you're teaching him how to behave. You've obviously done a good job with that. But when he comes home, he feels safe. Yeah, he's 5, and we need him to express his emotions like in more mature ways, but he's 5. The reality is he feels so safe with me and with his mom that it's never a thought of, do I need to hold this emotion back? And when I began to see it that way, it makes me emotional. I love my kids so much. I pride myself, maybe more than anything, on wanting to be a great dad and wanting an intimate relationship with my son. And the fact that I know, even though he challenges me right now, that he sees me as a safe person, it's all the validation that I need. But it's also a convicting thought when I consider my relationship with my Heavenly Father. See, I struggle with all the stuff that I've been talking about this morning. I struggle with this idea that I shouldn't complain about this because I believe God's bigger than it. And so what I do is I don't want to say anything that might rub God the wrong way. And so I'll complain to other people, but then in my time of prayer, I kind of dress it up, right? I'm more humble when I'm talking to God. I'm more choosy with my words when I'm talking to God. I don't want him to be offended by my feelings. And the reality is, when I do that, I'm telling God, I don't feel fully safe. God wants you to have that safety. He wants you to have that intimacy. He wants you to have that trust. To whine and complain at him, to yell at him, to argue with him. Like, he would rather have that than to not have that intimacy with you. Verse 34, it continues. It says, and he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And then the shortest verse in the Bible, maybe one of the most powerful, verse 35, Jesus wept. Think about that. Jesus, the Son of God, the all-powerful Son of God, fully human, wept. He didn't dab his eyes with a Kleenex. He ugly cried with the people that he loved. And we learn something so amazing about Jesus in this moment, and it challenges some of these false perceptions that we have of him. See, if we stopped before this part of the story, we might get this idea that Jesus is this tough love Jesus. That he loves you, but he does it in a way where it's tough love. He's going to let you experience hardship because it's going to make you a better person. And if we stop there, we miss the full picture of who Jesus is. We miss the full picture of what his love actually means for us. See, before this part in the story, yes, Jesus, knowing that Lazarus was going to die, chooses to wait. However, in this part of the story, knowing that he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, he still stops and enters into the pain that Mary is feeling. Jesus has every right to say, why are you guys crying? Don't you know who I am? I'm about to do something crazy. This whole thing that you guys have been mourning for this entire week, that you've stopped your lives to grieve so deeply on such a raw emotional level, I'm about to undo it. But he doesn't do that. So you might be experiencing a season of tragedy, a season of pain, a season of suffering, a season where you're asking a lot of questions. And I can sit here and tell you that it's okay because God's going to redeem your situation, but the reality is, even if he does redeem your situation, the reason it's going to be okay is because he wants to enter into that pain with you. Your pain matters to Jesus. Even if your pain comes from a lack of full understanding. Even if it comes because you haven't seen the end of the story yet. Your pain matters to Jesus. We finish out this passage in a really interesting way. Verses 36 and 37 says, so the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? And it's really interesting that in this incredible passage of Scripture, we end right where we started. Feeling this tension. Not entirely sure how to reconcile in our brains our faith in Jesus with the pain that he's allowed us to experience. And what I don't want to tell you today is that it's going to be okay because God is still in control. That's true, but that's not what I want to get across today. What I want to tell you is it is okay for you to feel that pain. It is okay for you to feel that tension. That tension, that pain, this time of your life, it is so important. It deeply moves and greatly troubles the heart of Jesus. And the reality is, this is a series on how he heals us. We experience hope and healing when we invite Jesus into our pain. Not when we try to hold our pain back. Not when we say, hey, God, you can have the happy parts of my heart, but you can't have this part. Not when we say, oh, I'm really struggling with this, but I don't want my faith to be questioned, so I'm going to pretend like I'm not hurting. That's not when we experience hope. That's not when we experience healing. We experience it when we invite Jesus into the intimacy of our pain. It's a beautiful tension. That a message about grief is also a message about hope. That it's only when we are vulnerable enough to enter into those places and invite Jesus in that is where he heals us. So I want to leave you with this question today. Is there a part of your heart that you're keeping off limits for God? God, you can have this part, but this part, I'm not there yet. What area of your heart do you need to surrender to God in order to experience his healing? This is why at the end of every single service, we have a group of individuals who come forward as our prayer team. And one of the reasons they exist is because they want to help others experience this. That some of you guys are sitting here this morning, some of you guys have been attending here for a long time, feeling just this profound pain. But you're not ready to open up. You're not ready to talk to God about it. You're not ready to pray about it. And so we tell you that we have a prayer team who wants to pray for you, and that is why they exist. To go to God in those times of pain. To walk side by side as you become vulnerable, as you invite God into that. And yet, so many of us will say, all right, cool, I'll see you next week. And we pretend like we're fine. And we either suppress it, or we go talk about it to someone else, or we let it to allow it to compromise our faith. And we're missing out on the hope and the healing that Jesus has for us. And we do communion here every single Sunday. The reason that we do communion, it's a practice that helps us to remember the cross. We remember what Jesus did and what he symbolized when he went to the cross. And the reason that we can do it every single week, and I don't believe it loses its meaning, is because we can never exhaust the depth of meaning of the cross. There's always some new reflection that I have when I think about the cross. And today I'm specifically thinking about the fact that the cross might be the most literal example of Jesus being willing to enter into your pain. And so maybe this morning, as you're taking the elements of communion, maybe that's a time for you to get with God and say, all right, God, this feels weird. I don't fully trust you with this part of my heart, but I'm going to try this. I'm going to try surrendering this part to you. I'm going to invite you into my pain. Because Mary could have stayed home. She didn't have to go and talk to Jesus. She could have gone to Jesus and she could have left her deeper thoughts and her questions to herself. And she wouldn't have experienced the healing that she did when she trusted Jesus with the ugly parts of her heart. So maybe today you need to have it out with God. Not because he's wrong, but because it's how you feel. And he wants to see your heart. He's safe. Let's take communion.